It was the first death in 50 years. That is to say, not for a lack of effort. In this city of 739,452, there were at least 7,392 attempted suicides and 862 attempted murders last year alone. The emphasis here was on the word attempted. Not one person who had tried to end their life or that of another had succeeded. For 50 years, not one person had died in this town. Not one single soul had been laid to rest for all that time. Suicide City had certainly earned its name. I don't know why I'm compelled to bring this up right now. It was old news at this point. Perhaps looking down at the corpse's lifeless eyes opened up some old wounds. Maybe I should start by introducing myself. My name is Jeff McDanswald. I'm 62 years old, a private investigator, and I've just taken on my last case. That is, if I'm lucky. The body was lying on top of the now caved-in roof of the old beat-up van just outside of the hospital. It had fallen from a 10th floor window this cold winter's morning. Snow was gently beginning to cover the body, much the same as any evidence I was going to try and gather. The officers had taped off the area, but natural curiosity drew a crowd. A death would be the talk of the town before long if it wasn't already. The lights from the crowd's smartphones sparkled around the crime scene. No doubt the social net's live streams were already flooded with whispers and gossip. Rumors would spread just as conspiracy theories back in the old days. Lies and falsehoods would rise through the streets like a disease. The cultists would eat this up. I could easily see those whack jobs using this news as fresh fuel to bring more people to their fold. I had to work fast. Facts might just win this fight if I tracked them down quickly enough. I wasn't too confident, though. The snow gathered, and what little evidence I would find was rapidly growing cold. I had already received the statements from the officers who had arrived on the scene. It happened at roughly 5 a.m. An unidentified man fell from a 10th floor window to the ground below, landing into the unoccupied van. Jumpers were a common occurrence in this city, and as such, only a small crowd of onlookers gathered at first. Normally, jumpers got up and went about their day, carrying their injured body and pride with them off to the local clinic to get patched up. At 5:15 a.m., however, the victim had not awoken. Police were called in and the perimeter was set up. That's when it was determined the body was deceased. They had not yet identified it, but it appeared uninjured in any way, much to the officers' surprise. The body was dressed in a standard blue hospital gown and had no identifying marks or tattoos. It was a fair-skinned male, blonde hair, average weight and height, regular build. Just your average everyday guy off the street. His gown had no form of identification on it. Beyond the details given, there were no other items of note. The van was a half-rusted heap of junk metal, very worn out and very old. It seemed to have been owned by a person or persons unknown who attempted in some small way to rig it up in a similar manner to an old hippie bus. Not a remarkable effort, mind you, but at least they tried. There was nothing worth noting inside the vehicle. All that lay there were empty bags of chips, fast food containers, and cigarettes strewn about. Just the regular stuff you find in unkempt cars. Of note, however, was the smell of cannabis, which wafted through it heavily. Someone definitely had some good times in this van. While the officers worked on dispersing the crowd, they ran the van's plates. While they were doing this, I scanned the area surrounding the scene for any evidence that could be gathered. Off a short distance, I spied a small piece of white paper. It had been almost invisible in the snow that was gathering. It looked to be a small tag with a piece of string attached at the top. On it was written 101 with permanent marker. I pocketed the evidence for examination later. An officer approached and informed me they were still attempting to find a coroner to perform an autopsy. Examining dead bodies became a dying science over the past 50 years, as the need for them had dropped substantially with the lack of death. Indeed, it was ironic. While we waited for more information, the officers escorted me to the 10th floor. In the elevator, I was informed that the van was under the ownership of Hugh James Frizzelli, alias Who Man. He was a local bartender and artist whose whereabouts were currently unknown. A warrant was put out for Mr. Mann as a person of interest. I had no doubt that he'd be found and brought in for questioning before noon at least. Upon arriving at the 10th floor, we were led to the room where the John Doe had fallen from. It just so happened to be the cancer ward. It's ironic now that I think about it. People didn't die, but they could still get sick in all the normal ways. God has a funny way of working, I guess. Assuming this was his doing, of course. The room was the same as all the others. A hospital bed with buttons to aid in the comfort of the patients. Medical devices were wired up with screens that made beeps indicating if you were still alive. A television was tuned to the local news. Chairs placed for others to sit and comfort you in your time of need. The only difference in this case was the cold winter's wind blowing through the broken window. According to the medical staff, the window had shattered earlier in the week due to a mishap involving a custodian and a well-placed broom. It was due for repair later this morning. Given the abnormally lengthy time it took for the damage to be dealt with, it wasn't too unreasonable to assume the hospital was having a lengthy list of financial problems. After interviewing one of the registered nurses, it was gathered that no one had been in the room since it was closed off. The staff also noted that the prior resident had been moved from there after the window incident. As luck would have it, they had been discharged shortly after the incident, having received a successful 34 years of cancer treatment. Good for them. After a thorough investigation of the staff in the room, no further evidence could be gathered. Also, it appeared everyone on the floor had a clean alibi. Surprisingly, the unknown person did not match the description of any of the staff or patients. Even more curiously, no one had even been seen walking into or from the room. Checking security footage led nowhere. As the medical staff stated, cameras weren't allowed inside the ward due to patient confidentiality. More likely a budget issue, but to each their own. All these facts led me to one big unanswered question. How did our John Doe walk past the medical staff, security and safety markers, to ultimately reach his demise below without a single person noticing? Suddenly the TV screens in the halls buzzed loudly, and a figure appeared on them. I recognized the symbol that had been etched into his forehead. It was Zion, the cult's head of propaganda. I sighed in preparation, knowing this was going to be interesting. He prattled on for a bit in the typical preacher's way about various religious scriptures and stories. Then, he began showing videos gathered from the scene. Using the dead body as evidence, he proclaimed that the cult had glimpsed the key to death and was now well on the way to finding the final journey we all sought. He then proclaimed that the journey would be found faster if more people submitted to the cult. The screen buzzed and quickly returned to its normal programming. Zion's offer was tempting, I'll admit. In fact, if I hadn't been such a rational person, I might have taken him up on it. Reason was my saving grace in this case, but sadly I knew it had become a rarity in this city. I had to work fast. There was a lot more at stake than I had originally thought when I got the call, and time was proving to be a not-so-friendly factor right now. The first big break in the case could be heard crackling on the officer's radio as we descended the elevator. Mr. Mann had been found and was now being processed for interrogation down at police headquarters. As I hurried to my car and slammed the door shut, I lit up a cigarette and thought to myself with a chuckle and a grin, these things are going to kill me one day. And with that, I drove steadily to the start of what would hopefully be my last case.